How are things today?
I'm here. I was thinking it was board, board meeting week, so that tells you how my week has been.
Oh, well, I'm sure glad it's not. I've got way too much stuff to get done for next week that I'm going to try and dive in this afternoon and tomorrow to get worked out. We had a pretty productive HR/finance committee meeting just before Christmas, and but I didn't get everything done before the holidays hit, and then I had one of my clients' projects go on to the front burner on high, and I just had to be completely devoted to that. And so at any rate, now it's time to do penance and catch up and get ready for the meeting next week. That'll see the formalization of some, the transition to the co-chair issue, the hiring proposal and outline for Ryan, and a whole bunch of things that are all exciting, but they're all just big changes that need to be worked through at this point. And all I've been able to actually accomplish in the last 2 or 3 weeks is just kind of keep the wheels on of that while I was having to deal with other stuff that took my time. So it's all good. There's just a lot of it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I like the background. You're back in Hawaii, at least in thought, if not in body, huh?
Yeah. Actually, I think this might be the Caribbean.
Oh, is it?
Um,
That's just the built-in Windows one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
or
it's the
Zoom one.
built-in.
It's a Zoom
It's the
background.
built-in. Yeah, it's a Zoom. But
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's the Caribbean because Hawaii doesn't have water that color. So theirs is a little more.
Maybe that's Homered about Next Generation.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah, maybe.
Oh my goodness. Oh my, Dick, good to see you.
Yes. The Three Musketeers here this morning.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't do a very good job of putting out a very enticing purpose or agenda, yesterday. All I could get off my plate was to at least send a note saying we are meeting. And I thought about pausing and trying to make something more enticing, but I realized I wasn't going to get it out if I didn't just send something to that's out there. But I also recognize that, if there isn't something enticing, exciting, or motivating, then, it's going to make it harder for folks to prioritize that on a Friday. So,
yeah.
It is what it is.
So I wanted to share, since we're waiting for people, how I'm going to integrate the Chat GPT into my MBA class this semester.
Outstanding.
You're what, Andrew?
Yeah, let's back up a step, maybe.
Okay, so using AI for having students write a paper. So I'm teaching the policy class, and policy analysis is part of the, they go over it in the textbook. And so the assignment for my students is going to be to pick one of the health related policies that are out there. And, it could be, Clean Air Act, it could be Clean Water Act, or, something more directly closely related to healthcare itself, but I don't care. But anyway, I'm going to have them use the AI to kind of format their analysis. And they'll have to turn that in because I want to see what the AI comes up with when they are throwing the questions at the generator. But then I'm going to have them, not only analyze the policy itself, but also analyze whether the results that they got from the AI are accurate. So they'll have to do research to confirm whatever the results of the chatbot AI Chat GPT generated. So that way, if I'm already asking them to start out using Chat GPT, then I don't have to worry about how they're using it if I'm going to see the first results. And then I'll also know how that results in a final product that is actually more not generated by AI. So,
so Dick, are you familiar with this Chat GPT issue?
Just the name, I saw something come across something, I don't know what, but just enough to be curious, more curious.
This is super. I'm going to try and bring up a window here if I can. I mean, this is, and especially, you know, given that you're teaching classes right now, you're going to be right in the thick of it, like
yes.
Andy is. And Andy's done something remarkable, and she's actually developed some draft language, you know, to share with the students on how they should be thinking about the use of this tool. And I think it's really interesting language, because what she did is turn this thing on its head in terms of using it from the standpoint of developing better questions, rather than getting worried about how the students use it to develop better answers. I don't know if you want to expand on that, or your thinking on that, Andy, but I thought that was brilliant.
Recording in progress.
Thank you.
Hang on a second.
I appreciate that.
I'm breaking.
Yeah, you're
Okay, I've got it. I unbroke it. There you go.
okay. Yeah, so Dick, Chat GPT is something that kind of exploded during the Christmas break holiday time. It's OpenAI is the organization that released a beta program available to the masses for free, where you can type in a question, you can tell it to write an essay on something, and it pops up, you know, within less than a minute. You have, you know, I told it to write a 500-word essay on something, and which isn't much, but, you know, and within like 30 seconds, I had a 500-word essay on the subtopic that I asked it to write on. So what I've taken from it is that it comes out with a very generic and uncited result. So it's kind of bland. It's like very about as vanilla as you can get in terms of writing, but it's well organized and it's well structured. And so the way that I have used it as I've kind of experimented with it is I've asked a question and gotten a result. And if the result isn't what I was wanting in terms of like if it's not sending me in the right direction, I rephrase my question until I've gotten a question that is I guess a better question. Is that I don't know how else to describe it really, but you know, how we ask questions in research papers makes all the difference in how we go about our research and how we go about analyzing the results of our research. And one of the things that I've learned over time as I've read student papers is asking the right question is really, really hard. You know, asking a good question. I've had a lot of students ask not very good questions, but because they had to go through the process of you commit to a question basically before you really get into the research. And so once they get into the research, they kind of discover that it wasn't a good question, but they're already committed to the original question. So Chat GPT is a great way to revise a question until it's something that you can actually turn into a well-written, well-documented, well-thought-out product, and actually have a conclusion that has you know some analysis and meaning to it. So
I think
so
brilliant because of, you know, I've started playing with this a little bit because, you know, I'm really enamored with the power of a good question. But we don't generally always have a really good way of developing good questions. I mean, they take time and banter with folks, and GPT gives you this really powerful way of trying out your question and saying, okay, with something that has read trillions of pages of information, what pops to the surface with this thing? So I've put in, I'm sharing my screen now. And so I brought up the Chat GPT interface. And so I just started off while Andy was, you know, describing that. I just put in the question, what is a good question? And so this machine is coming back with, rather than a normal Google search or something like that, where you get a bunch of links and a bunch of stuff that you have to sort through, it comes back with what seems like a well-articulated answer. A good question is one that's clear, specific, and relevant to the topic at hand, period. I mean, all the punctuation is there too. It should also be open-ended, allowing for a variety of answers and perspectives. Additionally, a good question should be objective, avoiding bias or leading language. That's a machine that just told us that.
So you didn't hear something like, hell, we can't do that.
So what's a question on your mind? What's a powerful, difficult question for you in your work right now?
How do we create healthy organizations?
Okay, so how do we create healthy organizations?
You need, healthy, not health.
Thank you.
That would be a very different answer.
And a very good question.
Okay, so I just hit the enter. So this isn't going to actually take too long. The machine's thinking. Okay, now it's starting to come back. And notice also here the structuring of its information. That first question just came back with basically a long sentence. Now it's coming back with something where it decided to enumerate the answer. For some reason, the body of knowledge it got into decided that this required, you know, some enumeration of stuff. So now we've got clear and effective communication, ethical leadership. I mean, you can read the list here, perhaps. I don't know how it's scaling on your screen. But you know, what's in here, I look at that and go, holy cow, that's a pretty good starting place.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then, you know, you can either write a paper outlining all 10 of those items, or you can pick one to get deeper into, like, how do you develop a strong and ethical leadership? And, you know, get deeper into the weeds. And then the downside, and actually, I think the good side of it is that it does not cite its sources. And so because it doesn't cite its sources, you know, in academia, you can't submit a paper without citing sources, right? So you have that, you get this information, and what it gives you is the prompts to actually do the research, you know, do the literature search to verify, validate the information that you got. So, you know, I see it as ever improving research prompts. And, you know, you can focus it down, narrow it down as you work through it, but it's so fast. You don't have to like go through days and hours of reading articles, trying to narrow down and figure out how to search. Because, you know, there's so much literature out there. And it's so hard to kind of parse through thousands and thousands of articles on a particular topic and you know, figure out which ones are relevant to your research. So this helps narrow down and improve the search, your ability to search what's out there in the literature, and, you know, create something that, you know, you may have point counterpoint, you may, you know, validate from one perspective or invalidate from one perspective. I mean, it just has so much potential.
So here's I don't know if you can read it here. I modified your first question. I said, how do we create, oh, I should have put healthy, darn it. I meant to say, how do we create healthy native and tribal organizations? So, right, I added the native and tribal focus to your original question. And it's still enumerating this, although it now came in with a summary paragraph. So I'm also interested in the formatting of the information and how it's thinking about how should I answer this. But look at some of these answers that come out. Again, this is a machine that just did this, that has talked about incorporating traditional culture and values. Jumping down there, number 5, addressing historical trauma and its effect on community.
Yeah, I just saw that.
You bounce through this thing and you go, yeah, this is touching on relevant, appropriate items, answering this question. If somebody were to start off working on a paper or doing research, this would lead you in a really good starting direction.
Yep. Yeah.
Where real quick, what's the data source for this CAP GPT?
It's my understanding is that they just let loose the machine to scour everything that it could find on the internet. They've talked about there being trillions of pages of content. So this machine has been told to just go out and scan anything and everything it can find on the entire internet that is digitally available, and to ingest it, and to then have an engine that somehow is able to use machine learning and algorithms to try and relate, connect, and associate with degrees of relevance and patterns information across all these trillions of pages, and then it's put on top of a natural language processing system. So you can type in the question and it uses a natural language processor to kind of parse out what is this question in terms of what are the verbs and the nouns and what are ancillary words that don't matter. If I use the word how in a question, it shouldn't come back and tell me the million of ways the word how is used. So it's trying to figure out that tribal organizations is really kind of a key search here, and then it's being qualified with native. So natural language processing is being used to parse out the question. And then it's coming back and using that processing to try and articulate through this massive database of knowledge to articulate a human readable response. And that's why I'm also interested in not only the content of the response, but how does it format the response? How is it thinking about presenting this to a human? It's giving me this introductory clause, creating a healthy organization. So it's kind of repeating my question back to me and kind of framing that response in a grammatically appropriate way of saying involving some specific considerations, colon. So it's using grammatical constructs here, and then offering this enumerated list, and then it's giving me a summary statement at the end that kind of wraps it back up again. I'm just fascinated with this.
Me too.
A question I have here, speaking of questions, is how do we evaluate student the knowledge, what are they leaving with? What are they capable of doing? Or are they simply checking the box to get a grade? And I'm not inferring anything here, Andy or Kai, about anything other than, my experience is that student hands in a paper, I look at it, we have some discussion, we have short classes, we have engagements, but how do we actually know that this is going to be something that, we never know, I suppose. How a student's going to be able to apply this or comprehend it or integrate it into, their sort of knowledge portfolio and going forward.
Well,
yeah.
My policy that is that for every point that they make in their paper, so if they have like 5 points that they make in their paper, there has to be at least 3 independent citations validating that, whatever that position is, whatever their argument is, they need to go through the process of validating that information. So by going through the process of validating the information, they're gaining critical thinking skills because they're being forced to actually, not just come up with these things off the top of their head, but they're being forced to actually validate it. And then the final is, for me, is that their conclusion, their discussion and conclusion has to be their own work, not the work of the chat bot, but they can use it to organize and find the main points that they want to make in their paper, but they have to validate it, and they have to do their own analysis and discussion on it.
They have to defend it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And, right now, I don't think we do a very good job. Well, not that we don't do a very good job of that, but I mean, I don't know about you, but a lot of the papers that I have seen, especially in more recent years, have just been horrible. They're not well organized. They're not well thought through. The research is half-assed. And I feel like students have been losing this skill of research and writing papers. And so, and then the whole critical thinking piece seems to have kind of fallen by the wayside in the last few years too. There's a lot of people out there who have very strong opinions about something, but they have absolutely no, they don't know how to defend they know they believe something, but they don't know how or why, and they have a hard time defending it with good, solid information. So that's what I feel this does, is it actually, it improves the critical thinking side of the research writing, and takes away the barriers that people have in their lack of ability to write. I mean, it's something, it just has really hit me hard in the last few years how the skill of writing has really kind of stopped being a thing. You are email and text and Twitter 140 characters writers now. We're not well documented, well thought out research writers anymore.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Andy.
So in one of the posts when we were, bantering on Facebook about this, and this is very, very superficial, but I likened this to the debate of should students be able to use calculators?
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a time when calculators were seen as taking away the process of students doing the mechanics of mathematics. And over time, we got used to not only having simple little add, subtract, divide calculators, but now we expect students to show up with programmable computer, calculators, where you can type in a formula and the thing will actually process and graphically display the result of the entire formula, algebraic expression. And we've gotten used to that as kind of the evolution of what the human brain is doing and guiding the machine to create the results it wants, rather than being so bogged down in some early mechanical aspects of it. Now, does that degrade some of the cognitive development of mathematical skills that our brain goo needs in order to work with logic and the structures of math? Because we actually teach math not because we're doing lots of heavy algebra every day, but because we need that cognitive structure of being able to see how different things add up to be somewhat equal. Or geometry is basically teaching our system of laws, and if you don't understand geometry or can't handle geometry, you're not going to be able to handle our system of laws, because they all use the same thing in terms of axioms and theorems and proofs. A proof in geometry is nothing different than a legal brief, reaching some conclusion on that. So the same thing I think is going to happen now with this AI tool as it relates to the development of writing and synthesis of knowledge and the sharing of it. Is this is now going to become in some way the calculator of knowledge, whereas we had for algebraic mathematical things, we had a programmable device that helped give us the answer. This is another programmable device that's giving us a different kind of answer in a different domain, but with the same kind of question of, can we actually enhance what the human is able to embrace and use and harness for good, by being able to have a greater access to this wider knowledge that the human brain would never be able to process a trillion pages of information to distill, what's needed to be able to answer some relevant questions right in front of them.
Yep.
I typed in the question here: compare and contrast native ways of knowing versus Western systems of knowledge. I thought it did a pretty good job.
Scientific. Yep. You know what's really funny to me, I've been learning a lot about the indigenous ways of knowing, because of indigenizing our content at APU. And one of the things that just keeps jumping out at me is everything that I've learned about non-traditional learning styles, like, what's considered in the school system a learning disability, is really addressed. I mean, every single learning disability that I can think of is addressed by indigenous ways of learning. And, the things that I struggled with when I was growing up in the education system is the compartmentalization of knowledge. It is the siloing of information and the lack of interconnectedness. I mean, when I was learning algebra, I remember just, hating it because it was so abstract. It was like, where in life am I ever going to see algebra? Of course, I use algebra all the time now. Well, not so much now, but, I went through in healthcare, algebra is all in healthcare. Radiation safety, when I was doing radiography, I mean, algebra is very, very important in science. But when I was, however old, 16 years old, 15 years old, how was I doing algebra? 14 maybe, learning algebra, and it was not contextualized for me. I was lost. And that was something I carried with me outside, as I went on in life. It was like, I need my learning, I need my information contextualized. And so every time I had an opportunity to teach something, I always contextualized it, because that was the way I learned. And it turned out that was, how it made it more accessible to many more people. Some people are able to just, take information and process it or whatever, but most people really need information to be contextual. And our Western ways of doing aren't contextual. So, I mean, I've been started doing in my classes just little things like mapping information. So I start out with an information map in the first class, and with each class, subsequent class, I show them where on the map we are. I mean, something is so simple, but it helps students stay abreast of where we started and, the road to getting where we end. And my end point is going to, complete the circle and bring us back to where we started. But But, simple things like that, it's so easy to do. And yet we don't think to do it.
That's a graphic representation, right, Andy?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think of the term mind mapping. I think that's a representation of what am I thinking, and I represent that in some way. I'm thinking that's what you're doing.
Well, not yes and no. I mean, I wanted to do a mind map in the class that I'm teaching now, but Blackboard doesn't do mind mapping. So it just doesn't support it. So if I were in a classroom, I would absolutely be doing a mind map to show the interrelatedness between in all of the elements of healthcare. It's not just a discrete point in a a single plane. Healthcare is so interrelated, it's networked and connected. And I wanted to do a mind map to show that, but there's just no way to do it with Blackboard, doing it digitally, without, students having to go through this massive learning curve of how to do, a mind map, use a mind map program. So, but anyway, it's a little more simple than that, but it's just like, here are the topics that we're going to cover. Here's how the information is organized. Because I, like in the textbook that I use for this class, I mix and match chapters. I don't do all of the chapters sequentially, because as much as I like the textbook, it doesn't organize it in the way that I want it organized. So like this week, we're reading chapter 4 and chapter 11. And so by grouping by showing what the groups are and what the information is within that group, it helps students relate the chapter 4 and chapter 11 as one piece, even though they're not connected within the textbook. And so, little tools like that just give students kind of like visual mnemonics, I think.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
What you're touching on is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that it dawned on me a few years ago that, back in the day when I was in college the first time, I never took notes. I was very visual. I would watch the professor lecture, and I would watch them write notes on the board. And at the time, I had the brain power to actually visually memorize the action. And so in order to remember that lecture, I could just visualize that day in class. And I didn't realize that when that was so important to me until I went back to school in 2010, and the teachers weren't writing on the board anymore. There wasn't this activity. They were lecturing to PowerPoints. And so I didn't have, every day it was the same. The teacher stood exactly the same. There was no variation, and it was harder for me to, and I was a little bit older too, but it was harder for me to process the information. And it took a long time for me to understand why that was. But I think visual, we are all way more visual than we know. And so much of memory is visual. And, just kind of like when you smell a certain smell and it transports you back to another place in time, just based on, that smell. Vision is the same if you tap into it and you realize what's going on. So I think the more visual aids that we can give our students to connect bits and pieces of information, the more the more they can actually take away from the class, instead of them having to be good note takers, because a lot of people like myself, I can't take notes because I'm creating that visual memory. If I'm not looking at the person doing the talking and the lecturing, I can't take notes. I mean, if I take notes, I'm not creating that memory. So so anyway, I think education, I guess I'm just really deeply steeped in the whole experiential education paradigm, just because I think that it's just so much more powerful, and it happens to be, aligned with Indigenous ways of knowing. And Kai, what were you going to say?
Oh, sorry. Well, I just was going to relate what you're touching on, is a couple pieces that I think are really vital around teaching. One is I'm really enamored with the work that was done in the 90s, and contextual teaching and learning as when the early days of PET scanning started coming in, and people could start mapping the brain to see what's going on when effective learning is being done and when effective learning is not happening. So under high stress, fight or flight amygdala response, learning stops happening because it blocks the memory in there. And what they found, primarily in this, and this has become a whole stream of philosophy around how to do education. Contextual teaching and learning basically says that for learning to occur, two things have to be present. One is there has to be meaning. That is, what you're talking about means something to the learner. And the second is there has to be a connection. And contextual teaching and learning has really been shown to be an effective way of taking career and technical education and contextual learning, project-based learning, community learning, all those kind of methods of contextualizing education, because it gives students meaning in what they're doing, and it allows them to build personal connections to what they're learning that's really important. So that body of knowledge I've always found is super important. So when I've gotten mixed up, and originally was at APU, I started working on providing information to adjuncts, because we basically would hire adjuncts, but we'd never tell them anything about how to be a good teacher. We just say, you have subject matter expertise, so come teach your subject, without ever asking the question, do we do anything to help them learn about how to be teachers, and what is learning from a biological, physiological perspective and a process perspective. So what you're talking about is a great example of the power of contextual teaching and learning when you contextualize it, but it's because that's the way our brain synapses are developed, and how you build connections, which are memories and are patterns that we can access. That's what learning is. Learning is not a magical thing that if you just simply tell someone a fact, they know the fact. They actually have to deconstruct that fact into things that mean something to them, other connections in their brain. It's like when we recognize a face, it's not because our brain has some place where that face is stored. Our knowledge of a face is actually broken up into, I believe, 7 different locations in the brain, that the brain parses out that into different areas. So we have to help that. And then what you're talking about with the visual learner, to me, is another area of focus, which is Gardner's multiple intelligences, which is some people learn visually, some people learn through auditory, some people learn kinesthetically, some people are spatial learners. And his 8 forms of intelligences is another thing that instructors need to learn, is that way of building meaning and connection is different for different brains. And you have to teach in multiple modalities, so that the visual learner is maybe seeing the PowerPoint words up on the slide. The auditory learner is hearing you. The kinesthetic learner is maybe involved in an exercise you're doing where you're moving stuff around the room and doing something spatial. The music learner has maybe got an opportunity to do, to write a song about something. The natural systems learner is able to contextualize it in terms of nature. So you've got to be, thinking about those 8 different ways of knowing, and giving each kind of learner their own way to connect with what you're teaching, rather than teaching to the style that I prefer, which I'm a very auditory learner, but I have to have the kinesthetic activity of writing notes. For me, there's something about that kinesthetic activity that makes all the difference in the world of whether or not I am developing meaning and connection to what I know. So at any rate, it's I think this whole area of learning and how do we help how do we help teachers of all sorts, develop their skills and their expertise? And then, back to chat AI, now we've got this new tool. And the question to me is, within the constructs of contextual teaching and learning and improving the actual learning in, that's happening with the learner, Dick's original point is, are we creating better students? And your point, Andy, about, what's going on learning, how does chat GPT now fit into this? How do we use it to create more connections? How do we use it to create more meaning in what the learning process is going on? So they'll actually will learn it. And also, how can this chat GPT be a way of enhancing different learning styles in there? It'd be interesting to go back and I'll do this in a second here. I'll go back and write a question of how can I use music to teach the differences between native ways of knowing and Western science knowledge. And I'll see whether music brings in something interesting that for music-based learner would
Yep.
I'll let you know here in a second what I come up with.
Yeah, we definitely need to do a better job with adjuncts. It just, I mean, when I was adjuncting, I just flew by the seat of my pants. I really had no support at all. And I mean, I got good feedback from students, so they kept me on, but with all of the healthcare stuff that I'm doing, I definitely want to connect with my adjuncts and make sure that not only are we connecting within our classes and, doing some of the different things and making sure that we're hitting on these different learning styles and, providing activities that hit on the different learning styles. But I think it's also really important to connect like the whole program, like, how, and I've kind of beaten the drum on this since I started, but like, when students are, coming in and taking all of their business classes like accounting and marketing and ethics and whatever finance, whatever classes that they're taking, they're learning them as single units rather than as a connected unit. And I've said over and over again, it's what I have seen when students are coming into senior project and they're not connecting what they've learned in their individual classes with the application of it in senior project and writing a business plan. When they're not connecting those dots, we're doing something wrong. And so, I mean, I just think it is ever more important that when we're teaching, and Beverly realized this just this last semester, when we're teaching accounting, not only is it important to, teach the skills that are used in accounting, but to connect it with how students are going to interact with accounting again later in their learning. So,
so check this out. So I took the original question that was, compare and contrast native ways of knowing and Western systems of knowledge. That was the original question I put in, and I only added to it, how can music be used to compare and contrast native ways of knowing versus Western systems of knowledge? So I put music in there as a qualifier, and here's the response I got back.
Music can be used.
Mary, my wife, she just walked in. We have an upstairs shared office now, and she's a music teacher. So I'm going to share this thing.
No, read. Did you see? I don't know if you can read this response on your screen there. What do you think about this response? Hey, Mary.
I can't. Hi.
This is an artificial intelligence generated response
to this question up at the top.
Well, I just know I agree with it anyway. bridge to bring people together. Yeah. Yeah, I teach privately, and I keep saying you need to find a friend to practice with or to play with, because that's the fun of it. So, yeah.
I think it's a relatively insightful answer for a machine.
I what was that? We were at the was it a Lunac? I saw the native dancers recently at AFN, I guess, and they just really grabbed me. I mean, it was just so, well, holistic is the word that's used here, but they were into it. It was full of energy and joy and friendliness and inclusivity. It was beautiful. Yep.
Yeah, this is good.
Let's go do it.
I'm going to copy this. I'll paste it in the notes for this week.
I like that because at the beginning of the school year, when Janelle was kind of introducing us to the concepts of Indigenous ways of knowing, one of the people in my group that I was paired up with is the music teacher, and I can't remember his name. David
APO.
or at APO. I can't remember his name, but he was really struggling with the concept of how is he supposed to indigenize his music classes. And he's like, am I supposed to bring in different types of instruments, or what does this mean? And I think something like this just breaks down those barriers of of the how do I do it? You can, this is a great outline for teaching how music is viewed from different perspectives, what the value it brings to people, and so it's not just about bringing in the book that I was reading on how to indigenize curriculum was talking about. It's not just using examples, indigenous examples. It's making sure that you incorporate the whole, or the indigenous worldview, and so it's when it comes to music, it's not just incorporating the indigenous, whether it's Alaska Native, whether it's American, Native American, whether it's African music, indigenous music, or whatever the different cultural music types are from around the world. It's not just incorporating that. It is looking at whatever your subject is from the different perspectives. It's combining, but also recognizing and acknowledging the different perspectives, so that when you're teaching them, people understand where, again, it's contextualizing, but understanding how the information fits into, or how it gives them guidelines on how to integrate the information into their own world, I guess. But having an outline, a place to start like this, is just so powerful to me.
Yeah, the asking, the whole idea of asking the I don't even want to say the right question, but a question that really causes a person to sit up and say, wow, I need to really be engaged with this because I'm attracted to it. That's magic. Yeah, that's lovely. I like that. That is so powerful. Rather than a student logging on or in class and they have some perfunctory thing to submit, and we evaluate it. They get points, they get a grade, they go on, and what have we done? We've checked the box. That's horrible. That's awful. I don't like
that. Something else I've spent a lot of time thinking about over the last decade or more is, all of us brick and mortar schools are competing with much less expensive online check the box universities, where people literally are checking a box and getting a diploma for checking the boxes, and not, the process of learning is minimal, at best. And so how do we go about differentiating ourselves, especially, we're more expensive than that online diploma mill. So at the end of the day, people are still coming out with a bachelor's degree in something, right? And does the employer really sit back and go, oh, they've got a bachelor's degree? Do they weigh the difference between a bachelor's degree from like Southern New Hampshire University, which is a check the box degree, or are they weighing, yes, if they see Harvard, Yale, some of the really big universities, yeah, it does weigh differently than all the rest of us. But here we are. We need to bring value to our students, I think. I mean, that's my business side of my of my thinking is, we're asking students to invest time and money into an education. If they really want to learn something, we need to give them value for their buck. And I think that's what differentiates us from those other cheaper, easier diploma mills. Is, students, we want students to come out of our program going, yeah, I really gained knowledge through my experience of going through this program. So
have you seen, Andy, the reports? I don't know if APU still does it. They were doing it back in 2013 and before. It's a national assessment program that looks at what do students know before and after their college education. And APU is participating in that. And it's what precipitated that complete rewrite of the core general education requirements, that model that I sent you at some point about how the foundational skills are supposed to be developed into the final senior level courses with the full manifestation of those skills. Well, that was born out of that work that was comparing it. And APU realized, like most other colleges and universities in the country, that students were coming out of their 4 years without actually learning much.
right.
With the exception of some that were getting very transactional skills. Those transactional skills, turn a wrench or, do a few engineering calculations, stuff like that they were getting. But for the most part, they weren't actually, they were taking all these general education courses and all these other classes, but an objective test of what do you know before in your freshman year and what do you know when you're leaving, there wasn't a big delta. And that was the reason for that rewrite, was to try and change the trajectory of, are students getting something really valuable out of this process beyond the transcript?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It would be nice to receive some training on that as an instructor, especially as an adjunct, when we're creating our classes, because we have so much leeway in how we interpret what the class is supposed to be, what we teach, what we, the textbooks that we use, or whatever. So,
well, especially for classes like Dick's, because Dick is teaching. I don't know if you're still teaching at that critical thinking class. That class is one of those ones. It was one of those foundational ones that is
right.
absolutely essential for folks to understand, why is that class there and how is it supposed to fit into the rest that come later. Do you remember that process, Dick, when we were rewriting all of the core base curriculum and trying to build that scaffolding from introductory foundational knowledge to realized content knowledge? Does that ring any bells for you?
It rings a bell, but I'm not getting a lot of content when I do a brain scan on myself here. But I was just thinking about the critical thinking, and I'm not teaching that class. But
okay.
yeah, critical thinking as far as what I try to do is, I mean, this goes back to my days growing up on the res and then becoming a principal of a tribal school and doing experimental learning with Westinghouse Learning Corporation out of Palo Alto. And we were just flying by the seat of our pants. I'm trying to make a transition from what we are talking about here to my roots back in the early 70s. And all the teachers that I hired in K-8 were special ed trained because of their diagnostic prescriptive skills, not because the kids are stupid.
Right.
And we had an individualized learning program. We didn't do much in terms of bringing in indigenous knowledge or indigenous applications. And we missed the boat on that, except that we had tribal control. We had a tribal influence on that school, in that school campus, that was transformative. So we literally tore down the cattle guard and took out the whistle that blew at 8, noon, 1, and 5 that said, you know, this is a non-native campus. And we took all that out. And people started coming onto the campus from the village.
Mm-hmm.
So the more that we bring in, and I think about APU in this transition that we're going through to a tribal college, and what you're talking about here, it's just absolutely magical. I love what you guys are talking about here this morning. And I apply it for myself as an adjunct. I absolutely believe, and I don't know about the other adjuncts, but for myself, this is good stuff. And it connects with my past, connects with what I'm doing. And I hope it will connect to where APU and what we're doing is going in the future, because this stuff is wonderful. Thank you, both of you.
Well, and this is the stuff that, you know, convinced me that learning how learning is happening and how to design it is actually an essential leadership skill. You cannot be a leader of any organizational effort without being able to think through, okay, what do the people in my organization know? Prerequisite knowledge. What is it they need to know and need to do? And how do I think about the pathway of their learning in order to move the organization in a new development? It's basically anyone who designs a course is essentially having to work through what a leader should be developing in their ability to design change in an organization. Yeah. And if you don't understand the methods and the structures of how to design learning and what it means to the individual brain and behavior, you don't have that skill set. And that's why I fought so hard and lost to preserve the education department at APU originally, before it went away. Now it's come back again, because I believed that it needed to be an essential body of knowledge and research within APU to not just be a place to do K-8 education preparation, but to be the place that would own the question of how do we learn about learning and how do we convey to the faculty, staff, and students the skills of learning and teaching as an essential skill we all need to have in every single endeavor that we're involved with. What do we know? What are we going to need to know and do? And how do we design the pathway of developing the human and their brain and their ability to cross that chasm?
Yeah. I about 8 years ago, I had the pleasure of working with a bunch of tribal colleges in South Dakota, Nebraska, and then we ended up actually down in Sitka. In Kansas, at Haskell, and
yes,
that it was a project with the National Park Service. But connecting the dots with being an organizational consultant, this application fits with many of the native clients as well. As how do we create better questions, engagement, indigenous, indigenizing, like the ANCs, the village and regional corporations, and the disconnect that so many have had with the indigenous population in which they're to serve. That's why there's been so many kerfuffles between many native communities, tribal groups, and ANCs. And that's getting addressed and repaired and talked about and discussed in all kinds of different formats. Many of whom in our group are, front and center on that. But it all, I remember going to sort of a self-help thing in Oregon many years ago. And I got teamed up with this guy, and we ended up spending a night, part of a sort of like an outward bound kind of thing. And I thought the guy was a lunatic. And he would sit there, and the rain was pelting down, and it was windy, and Oregon, monsoon. And I got teamed up with this guy, the last guy I wanted to be teamed up with. And his mantra about half the night was, everything's connected. Everything's connected. It's like some bad trip, and, but yeah, that's so true. Anyway, I got to go here. I have a date with a married woman.
Oh, sounds good. Well, I just put the link in the chats to this APU document. This basically shows the design pathway on page 2 of how APU's curriculum is intended to take the introductory competency foundational studies, to connect them through the degrees of study into growing competency through integration of specialized knowledge, and then at graduation, the realized competency of what they've learned there. And I believe, I think APU's model is brilliant. I just think that we need to do more to make sure everybody knows it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I put the links also in the notes for today's meeting.
Very beautiful.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
I totally agree that, I'm sure that at the time that this was developed, that, those who were involved kind of were engaged with it. But there's been so much turnover since that time that this was never introduced to me ever.
Well, even at the time that it was, even at the time it was done, there wasn't full buy-in, to the whole thing. There were basically a lot of silos of domain teaching, and this was kind of pushed down from on top as we need to redesign this stuff. But a lot of folks do their domain stuff, teach their class, and that's kind of the extent. And this is a holistic system-wide view of what are we accomplishing at the end that requires a different, got to go to the balcony on this one. So anyway, thanks for the chat and the time to dive into this stuff. I think this is a fascinating, critical area. What was that you're putting up, Dick? Your camera is is out thinking things and not letting us see the cover.
Yeah.
Oh,
put it right in front of your face. Oh, Better World.
Oh, there
okay.
you go. Better World.
I got my book. I only have 42 books to read.
Cooper,
I got a collection of books
distill it
too.
down. All right.
Good to
All
see
right.
you.
All right, you guys have a good one.
Right.
Yeah, you too. Nice chatting with you guys.
All right.
Yeah.